The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of Zephyros Prime, capital world of the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever known. High above the bustling streets, in the royal palace that pierced the clouds, Empress Valna stood at her window watching the daily ceremonies below. Her silver skin caught the light, and her 4 arms moved gracefully as she reviewed the reports floating before her on holographic displays. Behind her, 12 elite guards stood at attention. 11 of them represented the finest warriors from across the Alliance worlds. There were 4 Cronan soldiers, their thick gray hide serving as natural armor, muscles that could crush steel beams, and reflexes faster than most species could even see. 3 Veltar psychics stood motionless, their large black eyes constantly scanning for threats that existed only in probability and possibility. 2 HammerClan engineers monitored defensive systems through neural links, their cybernetic implants glowing softly. 2 more guards from the crystal worlds of Andera possessed the ability to become nearly invisible by bending light around their bodies. Then there was Ben Torres. He stood 6 feet tall with brown hair and simple clothing. No natural armor, no psychic powers, no cybernetic enhancements, and no special abilities that scanners could detect. Among the gathered warriors, he looked completely ordinary. Yet when Empress Valna needed to trust someone with her life, she looked to the human. The morning reports show nothing unusual, said Commander Krax, the largest of the Cronan guards. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. All defensive systems are operating at full capacity. The orbital stations report no unknown ships in the system. Valna nodded but did not turn from the window. What do you think, Ben? The human stepped forward. Unlike the others, he did not stand at rigid attention. His posture was relaxed but alert, like a person ready to move in any direction at a moment's notice. Something feels wrong, Ben said simply. Too quiet. Too perfect. The Veltar named Zisk shifted slightly, his black eyes focusing on Ben. I sense no disturbances in the probability streams. All likely futures show a peaceful day. Maybe that's the problem, Ben replied. He walked to another window, studying the sky. When everything looks perfect, someone usually worked hard to make it look that way. Empress Valna finally turned from her window. Among her people, she was considered young at only 300 years old, but she had already proven herself as both a warrior and a diplomat. The alliance had grown stronger under her rule because she understood something many leaders forgot: the best advisors were often those who disagreed with everyone else. Explain your concerns, she said to Ben. 3 things, Ben said, counting on his fingers. First, we've had perfect intelligence reports for 5 days straight. No pirates, no border disputes, no unusual ship movements anywhere in Alliance space. That never happens. Second, yesterday's diplomatic meeting with the Outer Rim colonies was cancelled at the last minute. They said it was due to technical problems with their ships. Technical problems are common with older vessels, said one of the Andoran guards, his voice seeming to come from empty air. Third, Ben continued, I talked to the kitchen staff this morning. 3 of the regular suppliers sent different delivery crews yesterday. New faces, all of them. When I asked about it, they said the regular people were all sick with the same illness. Commander Krax made a dismissive sound. You suspect conspiracies in ordinary events, human. This is why your species sees danger everywhere. This is why my species is still alive, Ben answered calmly. Empress Valna considered this. She had learned to value Ben's insights precisely because they often contradicted conventional wisdom. 2 years ago, when he first arrived on Zephyros Prime as part of a cultural exchange program, no one expected him to become her personal guard. He had no special training, no advanced technology, and no enhanced abilities. But Ben Torres had something else. He noticed things others missed, and once he made a promise, nothing could make him break it. The story of how he became her guard was simple but telling. During a state dinner 6 months after his arrival, an assassin had infiltrated the gathering. The killer was a shifter, one of the rare species that could change their appearance to mimic others perfectly. Palace security systems could not detect the imposter, and even the Veltar psychics failed to sense the deception. Ben had been serving as a cultural advisor that evening, explaining human customs to curious diplomats. He noticed that one of the serving staff moved differently than the others. Not wrong enough for anyone else to detect, but wrong enough for Ben to pay attention. When the fake servant moved toward the Empress with a poison blade hidden in their sleeve, Ben stepped between them. He had no weapons, no armor, and no backup plan. He simply stood in the way and refused to move. The assassin's blade struck him in the shoulder, but Ben grabbed the attacker and held on until security arrived. Later, when medical teams treated his wound, Ben made a simple statement: "I was in the right place to help, so I helped." The Empress had offered him rewards, titles, and honors. Ben accepted only one thing: the right to continue protecting her. Now, standing in the throne room while her other guards dismissed his concerns, Valna remembered why that protection mattered. "Double all security protocols," she ordered. "Contact the orbital defense stations and request detailed scans of all approaching vessels." "Your Majesty," said Zisk, "such measures may cause alarm among the civilian population." "Better to cause alarm than to ignore warning signs," she replied. "Ben, what else do you recommend?" "Keep today's schedule, but change the locations," Ben said. "If someone is planning something, they'll expect us to be in specific places at specific times. Also, I'd like to position backup teams at all the usual escape routes." "Escape routes?" Commander Krax's voice carried disapproval. "A Cronin warrior does not think of escape. A human guard thinks of everything," Ben answered. "Including how to keep the person I'm protecting alive." For the next several hours, the palace operated under increased security. The additional scans revealed nothing unusual. No threats materialized. The Empress conducted her daily meetings in different locations as Ben suggested, but everything remained peaceful. As the day wore on, several of the guards began to exchange glances that suggested Ben had overreacted. The Veltar continued to report no disturbances in probability. The Cronin guards grumbled about excessive caution. Even the Empress began to wonder if her human protector had finally made an error in judgment. Then, just as the afternoon sun began to set, everything changed at once. The first sign was a massive energy surge that knocked out the palace's main communication array. The second was the appearance of ships in the system that seemed to materialize from nowhere, bypassing all early warning systems. The third was the sound of explosions from the lower levels of the palace itself. Alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. Through the tall windows of the throne room, they could see ships descending toward the palace, their hulls bearing the twisted symbol of the Helix Collective. "Impossible," breathed Commander Krax. "Our sensors showed nothing." "Phase technology," said one of the engineers, his cybernetic implants flickering rapidly as he analyzed incoming data. "They must have developed ships that can exist slightly out of normal space until they choose to materialize." Zisk's large black eyes had gone completely white as he tried to process the sudden shift in probability streams. "The future paths are chaos. I cannot determine safe courses of action." More explosions echoed through the palace, closer now. The defensive systems that should have protected them had been designed to stop threats they could detect. An enemy that could appear without warning had bypassed every safeguard. "Your Majesty," said the lead Andoran guard, his voice tight with stress, "we must evacuate immediately." Empress Valna looked toward the doors of the throne room, then at her assembled guards. All of them were trained for combat, but this situation fell outside their training. An enemy with unknown numbers, using unknown technology, attacking from unknown positions. "Where would we go?" she asked. "If they can appear anywhere in the system, how do we know the escape routes are safe?" "We establish defensive positions throughout the palace," suggested Commander Krax. "Force them to fight us room by room. That gives them time to bring in reinforcements," said Ben. He was studying the tactical displays that showed the ongoing attack. "They came here for a specific reason. either to capture the Empress or to eliminate her. If we spread out, we make their job easier. Then what do you suggest? Valna asked. Ben looked around the throne room, analyzing its defensive possibilities. Heavy doors that could be sealed, multiple levels that could provide cover, communication systems that were still functional despite the main array being down. We make our stand here, he said simply. All of us, together, protecting the one place they have to come if they want to complete their mission. The other guards exchanged uncertain looks. They were trained to think tactically, to consider odds and probabilities, to make logical decisions based on available information. Ben, said Empress Valna quietly, what are our chances if we stay? The human looked at her directly, his expression calm despite the explosions growing closer outside. I don't know, he said honestly. But I know that wherever you go, I go. And wherever I am, I fight until I can't fight anymore. The mathematical probability of successfully defending this position against unknown enemy forces is extremely low, said Zisk. Math doesn't win fights, Ben replied. People do. Through the sealed doors of the throne room, they could hear the sound of running footsteps and shouted orders. The enemy had reached the upper levels of the palace. Soon, they would arrive at the throne room itself. Empress Valna looked at each of her guards in turn. The finest warriors in the galaxy, each one capable of incredible feats of strength, skill, or mental power. Then she looked at Ben Torres, the human who had no special abilities except one. He had promised to protect her, and he never broke his promises. We stay, she decided. All of us. We make our stand here. But even as she spoke the words, Valna wondered how many of her guards would still be standing when the final battle came. The first wave of attackers came through the main doors exactly 18 minutes after the initial explosions. Ben had been counting the time while helping the other guards prepare defensive positions around the throne room. The massive chamber provided both advantages and challenges: high ceilings with decorative pillars for cover, multiple entrance points that needed watching, and clear sight lines that could help defenders but also expose them to enemy fire. Commander Krax had positioned himself behind the largest pillar near the main entrance, his natural armor gleaming under the emergency lights. The Cronin warrior's confidence had returned once he could see a clear enemy to fight. Beside him, two of his fellow Cronin crouched behind ornate furniture they had moved into defensive positions. The three Veltar psychics spread themselves across the room, their black eyes closed in concentration as they tried to predict enemy movements. However, their expressions showed strain. Something about the attackers made them difficult to read through psychic abilities. The Andoran guards had taken positions near the side entrances, their light-bending abilities making them nearly invisible. The two engineers worked frantically to boost the throne room's defensive systems and maintain communication with any surviving palace security forces. Ben had chosen a spot near Empress Valna herself, close enough to reach her in seconds but positioned to observe the entire room. While the other guards focused on their specific areas of responsibility, Ben watched everything. Motion sensors detect 15 hostiles approaching through the main corridor, reported one of the engineers. They're moving slowly, checking each room as they advance. Cautious, observed Commander Krax. They know we're here but don't know our exact positions. The first enemy soldiers appeared at the main doorway. Ben studied them carefully as they moved into view. They wore black armor that seemed to absorb light, making them difficult to see clearly. Their weapons looked advanced but unfamiliar. Most interesting to Ben was how they moved, coordinated but not rushed, like professionals executing a well-planned operation. Helix Collective Shock Troopers, whispered one of the Veltar. I can sense their discipline. They've done this before. The first exchange of weapons fire lasted only seconds. The attackers probed the defenses, drawing return fire to identify guard positions, then retreated back down the corridor. No one was hurt on either side, but Ben recognized it for what it was: intelligence gathering. They're mapping our positions, he told Empress Valna quietly. Next time they'll come with a real plan. How many do you think there are? She asked. Ben considered what he had seen. Those 15 were just scouts. The real attack force is still coming. He was right. 20 minutes later, the motion sensors detected over 50 hostiles converging on the throne room from 3 different directions. The engineers had managed to seal 2 of the smaller entrances, forcing the attackers to focus on the main doors and one side passage, but 50 enemies against 12 defenders still represented terrible odds. Defensive fire pattern Alpha, commanded Cracks. Wait until they're fully committed to their attack, then concentrate fire on their front ranks. The second wave came fast and hard. The first attackers through the door carried energy shields that deflected most incoming fire. Behind them, more soldiers poured into the room, spreading out to take cover behind pillars and furniture. The throne room filled with the sound of energy weapons and the crackling of destroyed electronics. Within the first minute of fighting, Ben noticed something troubling. The mathematical precision that made the other guards so effective in normal combat situations was working against them here. They calculated angles of fire, estimated ammunition consumption, and analyzed enemy tactics with perfect logic. That logic was telling them they were going to lose. Enemy force strength exceeds our defensive capacity by approximately 4-1, Zisk reported during a brief lull in the firing. Probability of successful defense is decreasing rapidly. Then we need to change the odds, said Ben. He left his position near the Empress and sprinted across the open floor toward a fallen enemy soldier, drawing fire from multiple attackers. Instead of using conventional tactics, he grabbed the enemy's weapon and threw it like a spear at another attacker, then used the confusion to reach better cover. Torres, what are you doing? Shouted Commander Cracks. That was tactically unsound. It worked, didn't it? Ben called back, now firing from a position that gave him a better angle on the enemy's flank. But even Ben's unconventional tactics could not change the basic mathematics of the situation. More attackers kept arriving, and the defenders were running low on ammunition. The engineers reported that palace security forces had been overwhelmed throughout the complex. No reinforcements were coming. It was then that the first guard made his choice. I'm detecting multiple enemy squads moving toward the secondary command center, reported one of the engineers, his cybernetic implants flickering rapidly. If they capture that position, they can override all remaining palace defenses. Commander Cracks growled in frustration. We cannot leave our posts here. Someone has to stop them, the engineer insisted. The secondary command center is the key to the entire palace defensive grid. The logic was undeniable. If the attackers captured the command center, they could shut down what remained of the palace's automated defenses. The few surviving security teams would be completely helpless. I'll go, said one of the Cronin guards. My speed and armor give me the best chance of reaching the command center. Before anyone could object, he was moving toward a side exit that remained unsealed. I'll return once the command center is secure, he called over his shoulder. Ben watched him go and said nothing, but he knew they would not see that guard again. Not because the Cronin would be defeated, but because there would always be another logical reason to be somewhere else when someone could find a mission that made tactical sense. The pattern repeated itself over the next hour. Each time the situation grew more desperate, one of the guards found a perfectly reasonable justification to leave the throne room. 2 of the Veltar psychics departed to establish a telepathic communication network with surviving palace defenders. One of the Andoran guards left to secure the escape routes for potential evacuation. The second engineer went to coordinate with orbital defense platforms. Each departure was logical. Each mission was important. Each guard who left had legitimate reasons for their actions. But each departure also meant fewer defenders around Empress Valna. Ben noticed that the guards who remained were growing increasingly nervous. Not afraid of combat, but afraid of the mathematical certainty that their position was becoming hopeless. They were warriors bred and trained for victory, and this situation offered none of the familiar patterns they relied on. During the third major assault, when enemy forces had grown to over 80 soldiers attacking in coordinated waves, Commander Cracks made his own decision. Your Majesty, he said during a brief pause in the fighting, I must recommend immediate evacuation. This position is no longer defensible. Where would we go? Empress Valna asked. You've heard the reports. The entire palace is compromised. The lower levels, Crax suggested. We could establish a mobile defense, moving from position to position, making them work for every room. Ben looked at the Cronin commander with understanding rather than anger. Crax was not a coward. He was a professional soldier whose training told him to avoid unwinnable battles. Every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to find a better tactical situation. That's not a bad plan, Ben said quietly. But it's not our mission. What do you mean? Asked Crax. Our mission is to protect the Empress, Ben replied. Right here. Right now. Everything else is someone else's job. Crax stared at him for a long moment. In the Cronin's eyes, Ben could see the conflict between professional duty and tactical logic. Logic 1. I will scout the lower levels, Crax decided. Establish secure positions where we can make a more effective stand. He left through the same side exit the others had used. 3 of his fellow Cronin followed him. Their departure left only 5 defenders, Ben, Empress Valna, 2 remaining guards, and 1 very nervous engineer. Ben, said Valna quietly, perhaps they're right. Perhaps we should consider moving to a more defensible position. Ben looked around the throne room. Scorch marks covered the walls from energy weapons. Broken furniture lay scattered everywhere. The beautiful crystal windows had been shattered by explosions. The elegant chamber that had once symbolized the power and dignity of the Galactic Alliance now looked like a war zone. Maybe, he said. But I made you a promise, and this is where I'm keeping it. The 4th wave of attackers came an hour later. By now, the enemy had learned the defensive positions and developed specific tactics to counter them. They used smoke grenades to obscure vision, deployed energy dampeners to reduce the effectiveness of the remaining weapons, and coordinated their assault with mathematical precision. The 2 remaining guards lasted 15 minutes before tactical necessity forced them to withdraw as well. 1 left to maintain communication links with potential rescue forces. The other departed to secure alternative defensive positions. Each gave perfectly logical reasons. Each truly believed their missions were important. Each left Ben Torres alone with Empress Valna in a throne room surrounded by over 100 enemy soldiers. Ben checked his remaining ammunition, counted the enemy positions he could see, and calculated how long he could hold them off. The numbers were not encouraging. But Ben Torres had never been very good at mathematics anyway. He was better at keeping promises. Your Majesty, he said calmly, you might want to find some good cover. This is about to get interesting. Outside the throne room, enemy commanders were preparing what they expected to be their final assault. Inside, 1 human guard was preparing to show them why his species had survived everything the universe could throw at them. Not because they were stronger or smarter or better equipped than everyone else. But because once they decided to stand somewhere, nothing in the galaxy could make them leave. Ben Torres stood alone in the center of the throne room, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been the most beautiful chamber in the galaxy. Empress Valna crouched behind the ornate throne itself, the last piece of substantial cover remaining intact. Around them, scorch marks and debris told the story of hours of desperate fighting. Through the shattered crystal windows, Ben could see the black ships of the Helix Collective hovering above the palace like predators waiting for their prey to weaken. Below, in the corridors leading to the throne room, over 100 enemy soldiers prepared for what their commanders assumed would be their final assault. Ben, said Empress Valna quietly, you know you don't have to do this. No one would think less of you for leaving now. Ben checked his weapon one more time. He had enough ammunition for perhaps 2 minutes of sustained fighting. Against over 100 trained soldiers, that was nowhere near enough. Actually, I would think less of me, he replied with a slight smile. Besides, where else am I going to go? This is my job. The Empress studied his face, looking for signs of fear or doubt. She found neither. What she saw instead was something she was beginning to understand as uniquely human, the complete refusal to accept defeat simply because the odds were impossible. "You're not like them," she said. "The other guards, I mean. They're all excellent soldiers, but when the situation became hopeless, logic told them to find better options." "Logic is useful," Ben agreed. "But sometimes you have to ignore logic and do what's right instead." Through the main doorway, they could hear the sound of approaching footsteps. The enemy had finished their preparations. Soon, the final assault would begin. "What's right about standing here and getting yourself defeated?" Valna asked. Ben turned to look at her directly. "I gave you my word that I would protect you. Not that I would protect you as long as the odds were good, or as long as I had backup, or as long as it made tactical sense. I promised to protect you. Period." The footsteps in the corridor grew closer. Ben could hear enemy commanders giving final orders to their troops. In moments, they would pour through every entrance to the throne room in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm any remaining resistance. "For what it's worth," said Ben, taking position behind a fallen pillar that would provide minimal cover, "it's been an honor serving as your guard." "The honor has been mine," Valna replied. The final assault began exactly as Ben expected, fast, overwhelming, and coordinated. Enemy soldiers poured through the main entrance and the two side passages simultaneously. Smoke grenades filled the room with thick gray clouds that made targeting difficult. Energy weapons created a constant crackling roar of destruction. Ben had expected to last perhaps 2 minutes. Instead, something unexpected happened. The first group of attackers through the main door found themselves facing not a desperate last stand, but a tactical puzzle they had not anticipated. Ben was not fighting like someone trying to survive. He was fighting like someone trying to win. Instead of conserving ammunition and seeking cover, he moved constantly, using the smoke and debris as concealment while engaging multiple targets. When his weapon ran out of power, he grabbed weapons from fallen enemies and continued fighting. When those ran out, he improvised. A piece of broken crystal became a thrown weapon that disabled an enemy's helmet sensors. A damaged energy cell from a destroyed defensive system became an explosive device that cleared an entire group of attackers from cover. Even broken furniture became shields and weapons in Ben's hands. But what truly confused the enemy was Ben's tactical approach. Every military doctrine they knew said that a lone defender should seek the strongest possible position and make the attackers come to him. Ben did the opposite. He kept moving, kept attacking, kept forcing the enemy to react to him instead of executing their planned assault. "Target is not behaving according to standard defensive protocols," reported one enemy squad leader through the communication system. "He appears to be treating this as an offensive engagement." The Helix Collective soldiers were trained to fight logical opponents who made reasonable tactical decisions. They were not prepared to fight someone who seemed to operate outside the normal rules of warfare. After 20 minutes of fighting, something unprecedented happened. The enemy assault stalled. Not because Ben was defeating them, but because their carefully planned tactics were not working against an opponent who refused to follow the expected patterns. Squad leaders requested new orders. Commanders tried to adapt their strategies. The smooth, coordinated attack dissolved into confusion. "All units, focus fire on the single remaining defender," ordered the enemy commander. "Ignore defensive considerations. Simple overwhelming force." But even that approach created problems. In their effort to concentrate fire on Ben, the attacking soldiers began interfering with each other. Crossfire became friendly fire. Coordinated movements became chaos as different squads tried to target the same rapidly moving opponent. Ben noticed the confusion and began to exploit it. Instead of trying to defeat the enemy soldiers, he focused on making their jobs more difficult. He positioned himself so that shots aimed at him would hit other attackers. He used the throne room's acoustics to make his voice seem to come from multiple locations, giving false information that disrupted enemy communications. Most importantly, he never stopped moving and never stopped fighting. "This is impossible," muttered one of the enemy squad leaders. "One defender should not be able to maintain resistance against overwhelming force for this long." "Human combat psychology does not follow standard patterns," replied another. "Intelligence reports indicate they become more dangerous when facing hopeless situations." After an hour of continuous fighting, the impossible had happened. Over 100 elite soldiers had failed to defeat one human guard who should have been overwhelmed in the first 5 minutes of combat. The enemy commander made a decision that would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy. He ordered a complete withdrawal from the throne room to regroup and develop new tactics specifically designed to counter human fighting behavior. For the first time in hours, the throne room fell silent. Ben stood amid the wreckage, breathing heavily and covered in dust and debris. His weapon was empty, his impromptu equipment was destroyed, and he had sustained multiple minor injuries. But he was still standing, and Empress Valna was still safe behind her makeshift shelter. "Are they gone?" she asked quietly. "For now," Ben replied, scanning the entrances for signs of movement. "They're regrouping. Trying to figure out what went wrong with their plan." "What did go wrong?" Valna asked. "By every logical standard, you should have been defeated in the first few minutes." Ben considered the question while checking for functional weapons among the debris left by the enemy retreat. "They planned their attack based on how they thought a rational defender would behave," he said. "The problem is, I'm not fighting rationally. I'm fighting emotionally." "What do you mean?" "They calculated odds, ammunition supplies, tactical positions, and probable outcomes," Ben explained. "All of that told them they would win quickly and easily. But I'm not fighting based on calculations. I'm fighting because I promised you I would, and I don't know how to break a promise." Before Valna could respond, new sounds echoed through the palace corridors. Not the measured footsteps of enemy soldiers, but the running boots of friendly forces. "This is Captain Reed of the Alliance 4th Fleet," came a voice through the communication system. "Palace has been secured. All surviving personnel report your positions." Ben activated the throne room's communication panel. "This is Ben Torres in the royal throne room with Empress Valna. Position is secure." "Torres," came the surprised reply. "Our sensors show extensive combat damage to your location. What's your status?" "Tired," Ben replied honestly. "But we're both fine." Within minutes, Alliance soldiers began arriving in the throne room. Captain Reed, a tall woman with graying hair and the bearing of a career military officer, stopped short when she saw the destruction around them. "My scanners show evidence of sustained combat involving over 100 hostile soldiers," she said, looking from Ben to the Empress and back again. "Where are the other defenders?" "There were no other defenders," said Empress Valna, standing up from behind the throne. Ben held this position alone. Captain Reed's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching awe. She had seen the combat reports from other parts of the palace. She knew how many enemy soldiers had been involved in the assault. The mathematical impossibility of what Ben had accomplished was overwhelming. "How?" she asked simply. Ben shrugged, a gesture that seemed inadequate given the circumstances. "I had a job to do." Over the following days, as Alliance investigators pieced together the events of the attack, the story of Ben Torres spread throughout the galaxy. Not just the facts of what he had done, but the implications of how he had done it. The other guards, when questioned, provided logical explanations for their actions. Each had made rational tactical decisions based on the information available to them. Each had followed proper military doctrine. Each had acted exactly as their training dictated. None of them had stayed. Only the human had remained at his post when remaining meant certain defeat. Only the human had continued fighting when fighting made no logical sense. Only the human had treated a promise as something more important than personal survival. Word of the incident reached the highest levels of Alliance command. Military strategists studied the combat recordings, trying to understand how one defender had held off over 100 attackers. Psychologists analyzed human behavior patterns, seeking to understand the mental processes that made such actions possible. But it was Empress Valna who provided the clearest explanation in her official report. Humans possess a trait that our alliance has never encountered before, the ability to ignore logic when logic conflicts with loyalty. Other species make promises based on circumstances and conditions. Humans make promises based on conviction and honor. When a human gives their word, they do not calculate the costs of keeping it. They simply keep it. Within months, requests for human guards flooded in from across the galaxy. Not because humans were stronger or more skilled than other species, but because they offered something no other species could provide, absolute reliability. The Helix collective attack had failed not because of superior firepower or advanced tactics, but because they had encountered something their calculations could not account for, a human who cared more about keeping his word than keeping himself alive. Ben Torres returned to his duties as Empress Valna's personal guard, but he was no longer just a protector. He had become proof that some things in the universe were more powerful than logic, more enduring than strategy, and more reliable than technology. He had shown the galaxy that when humans made a promise, nothing in existence could make them break it. And that, more than any weapon or technology, was what made them truly dangerous to those who threatened the people they had sworn to protect.